When you've spent as many years as I have beside hospital beds holding the hands of those nearing the end of their lives, you begin to understand something. Not everything can be explained by charts, scans, or science. There are mysteries that linger quietly at the edge of this life, moments that touch something deeper than the physical. One of those mysteries is what we often refer to as a deathbed vision. Some call it hallucination, others call it comfort, but those of us who've witnessed it again and again, well, we simply listen. We bear witness. Over the years, I've sat beside patients who were completely alert, their oxygen levels normal, their minds sharp, and then, all at once, they would lift their gaze to a corner of the room and speak with someone no one else could see. "Dad, you came," one whispered, with tears gently slipping down her cheeks. Another smiled wide-eyed and waved, as if greeting more than most, could only sit in silence, because in that moment, something sacred was happening, and it wasn't mine to interrupt. One daughter sent me a video of her elderly mother. It was late at night. Her mother wasn't dying. Not yet. She was simply resting in bed when suddenly she began joyfully speaking to what sounded like several people. "Oh, you're here too? And you, my goodness!" The daughter, puzzled, stepped into the room. Her mother was glowing with happiness, reaching out to faces only she could see. It wasn't confusion, it wasn't delirium, it was reunion. Another woman shared a recording from a bedside camera. Her mother lay still, resting, but then, out of the silence, the word "Mama" floated through the room. Soft, clear, and unmistakably real. No one else was there, but the daughter knew the voice. It belonged to her sister, long since passed. These moments may not be printed in medical textbooks, but they live in the hearts of those who've experienced them. And today I want to share a few of those stories with you, not to explain them, but to honor them. Because whether they come from the mind or from beyond, they offer something we all long for at the end: peace, connection, and a sense that we are not alone. Let me take you there. Over the years, many have tried to explain these end-of-life visions through science, and as a physician, I welcome those efforts. We should always strive to understand. But even with all our instruments and theories, there are moments that still sit just beyond the reach of certainty. One of the more well-known explanations comes from neuroscience. Some researchers suggest that, as the brain nears death, it may activate regions tied to long-term memory. This is sometimes referred to as a life review. The theory proposes that in the final chapters of consciousness, the mind replays the faces, voices, and moments that shaped a lifetime, almost as if to close the book of life with reverence. And in a way, that's a beautiful thought. But here's where it doesn't quite fit. In my decades of work, I've noticed that these visions often occur weeks before death, not during the active dying phase. Patients are not unconscious or disoriented. They are lucid, grounded, often even cheerful. A true neurological suckdown or memory flood would be expected at the final physiological moment, when the brain is fading. But these experiences arise well before that. So while the theory of a life review may hold some truth, it doesn't fully explain what I've seen at the bedside. Another common argument is oxygen deprivation, that perhaps the patient is hallucinating due to low oxygen levels in the brain. It's a logical assumption, but in practice, it falls short. I've cared for patients in stable condition with healthy oxygen saturation levels who've described vivid reunions with departed loved ones. No signs of confusion, no difficulty breathing, no slipping into unconsciousness, just clarity, just presence. If anything, it is the absence of distress that makes these moments so remarkable. Then there's the theory involving medications, opioids, sedatives, or combinations thereof. But as any seasoned clinician will tell you, drug-induced delirium looks entirely different. I've seen patients under the influence of heavy medications, agitated, restless, unable to string coherent sentences together. But these deathbed visions are the opposite. They are calm, they're joyful, patients recognize names, they hold imaginary conversations with grace and delight. That's not how a mind under chemical stress behaves. Some also speak of DMT, a naturally occurring compound in the human brain that is often associated with vivid hallucinations during certain altered states. Some believe it might be released at death. But I must be clear, this remains purely speculative. There is no solid clinical evidence to support it, no controlled studies, just whispers of possibility. And as a physician, I cannot base understanding on speculation alone. So where does that leave us? In the space between science and spirit. In a quiet place where the heart of medicine meets the mystery of being human. Whether these visions arise from the depths of the brain or from somewhere we cannot yet name, I know one thing for certain. They bring comfort. They soften the threshold between this world and the next. And perhaps in that softening they prepare us, patient and doctor alike, for a goodbye that feels a little less like an ending and a little more like coming home. I don't have a definitive answer, and truthfully, after all these years sitting beside the dying, I'm not sure I need one. What I do know, what I have seen with my own eyes time and again, is that these patients in those sacred moments are not afraid. They are not slipping into death with terror or confusion. They are calm. They are smiling. They are speaking to familiar voices, reaching out to invisible hands as if someone they loved has come to take them home. It's not a descent into darkness. It's a return into light, gentle, warm, and full of recognition. There is a tenderness in those final hours that science cannot quite quantify, a kind of spiritual architecture at play, something built not with bones and neurons, but with memory, connection, and love. I've watched people who were once gripped by fear slowly soften, as if the veil between this world and the next was not a barrier but a doorway. And as they approached it, they no longer needed to ask what lay on the other side. They knew, or perhaps they simply trusted. Maybe it's a gift, life's final mercy. Or maybe, just maybe, it's proof of something greater than we can currently grasp. A truth that cannot be dissected in a lab or fully explained in a journal article. Something eternal, something holy. And in a way, I find peace in not knowing. Because what matters most isn't the origin of the vision, but the comfort it brings. So no, I don't claim to understand it all. But I do believe this: no one ever truly leaves this world alone. Whether it's through the presence of a loved one long gone, or the quiet sense of being guided, carried, or called, we are, all of us, escorted. We are held. And as a doctor, a witness, a father, and a man nearing the twilight of his own life, I find that thought more than enough. I've carried many of these stories with me. Quiet moments etched not in medical records, but in memory. Some I recall often, others arrive unbidden, like a whisper when the room is still. I remember a man named Harold, a retired school teacher with hands that trembled but eyes that sparkled with youth. For days he had been peaceful, content to listen to old jazz records and sip broth. Then one morning I entered his room to find him smiling at the far wall. "You know," he said, "my brother's here, hasn't aged a day. He wants to take me fishing again." His brother had died in the war over 60 years earlier. There was no fear in Harold's voice, only delight. He died quietly 2 days later, his hand resting on an invisible shoulder. Then there was Maria, a mother of 6, who had carried so much pain in her bones and burdens in her heart. Cancer had worn her thin, but it never touched her spirit. One evening her daughter called me in a rush, saying she's talking to Papa. When I arrived, Maria was sitting up slightly, eyes closed, whispering in Spanish, her late husband's name on her lips. "He's standing by the window," she said, "and he brought the lilies I love." There were no flowers in the room, but the scent, faint, unmistakable, drifted in as she spoke. Her breathing slowed that night, and by morning, She was gone. But not alone. I once cared for a gruff old veteran named Sam. He didn't believe in anything, he told me. No God, no spirits, no afterlife. When it's over, he'd say. But during his final week, he began asking his nurse to make space near the foot of the bed. "They keep standing there," he said, "and I can't stretch my legs." When pressed, he'd shrug it off. But the last thing he said before slipping into unconsciousness was, "Tell my mother I'm ready now." His mother had passed away nearly 4 decades earlier. I didn't need to say a word. His face said everything. And then there was Emma. Sweet, quiet Emma, who had lost a child many years ago, a loss she never truly recovered from. Her daughter told me Emma would often whisper in her sleep during her final days, repeating a single name. On her last night, she opened her eyes, smiled faintly, and said, "There you are, my darling boy." She took one deep breath and exhaled, as if releasing not just life, but grief. There was Mr. Langston, a retired jazz pianist who had spent much of his life playing in smoky bars and Sunday churches. His fingers had long since stiffened, but in the final week of his life, he began to hum. Softly at first. Then one morning, as I entered his room, I found him tapping his blanket in rhythm, eyes closed, smiling faintly. "She's playing again," he whispered. "She's been gone so long, but she's playing my favorite tune." He was speaking of his late wife, who used to sing beside his piano before cancer took her. That morning he hummed for over an hour, then drifted off to sleep, and never woke up. But in those last hours, it felt as though he'd returned to the music that made him whole. Then there was Ruth. She had been a nurse herself in the 1950s, tough as nails, sharp as ever at 89. She didn't speak much in her final days, but just a day before she passed, her daughter found her sitting upright, combing her hair with careful precision. "I have to look nice," she said. "They're coming for me tonight. I want to look like I did on my wedding day." She insisted on lipstick, something she hadn't worn in years. That night, she passed in her sleep, her hair neatly set, her lips a soft shade of red. As if meeting someone dear, after a long separation. There was also Isaiah, a quiet man who spent most of his life as a janitor in a school. Few visitors, no family nearby, but in his last week the nurses noticed he started speaking in the early mornings, long, gentle conversations in a language they couldn't place. "He's talking to someone," they told me, "but no one's there." One evening I asked him directly, "Isaiah, who are you speaking to?" He smiled and said simply, "The children." When I looked puzzled, he added, "The ones I used to clean up after. They've come to say goodbye." I don't know what he saw, but the tears in his eyes were not of sorrow. They were of joy. And then there was Mei Lin. She had moved to this country late in life, far from her homeland, far from the graves of her ancestors. As her strength waned, she began placing objects on the table near her bed. Fruit, tea, and paper cranes. "They'll need these when they arrive," she told me. "My mother will come first. She'll make the path clear." The night she passed, the nurse found every candle in her room burned low, though no one had lit them. A stillness lingered in the air, not of absence, but of reverence. These are not just anecdotes, these are echoes of something tender and eternal, moving quietly beneath the surface of our final breath. As a physician, I'm trained to observe, to question, to document, but in these moments I find myself simply holding space. And I've come to believe this: the end of life is not a door slammed shut. It's a threshold, one that opens not into emptiness, but into reunion. Perhaps not all of us will see the ones we love before we go. But for those who do, it is not a hallucination, it is home calling them back. And the rest of us? We are the ones left marveling in the wake of something holy. So now, dear listener, I turn to you. Perhaps you've seen something like this before. A loved one nearing the end, eyes gazing past the room, lips whispering names you hadn't heard in years. You may have wondered, just as I once did, whether it was confusion, a side effect, a flickering of the mind. But over the decades, what I've come to believe is far simpler and far more profound. These moments are not signs of the mind unraveling, but of the soul whether it is a final offering from the brain to comfort the body, or a gentle parting gift from the universe itself. I no longer feel the need to decide. What matters is not whether it can be proven, but whether it brings peace. And again, I have seen it bring peace, a kind of stillness that enters the room, a quiet recognition in the face of the dying, a softening of grief, not just for them, but for those of us left behind. We spend so much of our lives afraid of death, imagining it as a cold, lonely ending. But if you've ever watched someone greet a long-lost mother or reach toward the presence of a beloved child who left too soon, then you understand. It doesn't feel like an ending, it feels like a return. I've watched hardened men weep with joy as they whispered the names of those who raised them. I've seen quiet women light up as they described the fragrance of their mother's garden, though no flowers were present. These are not delusions, they are homecomings. And in those moments, I no longer see disease or decay or dying. I see reunion. So if ever you find yourself sitting at a bedside, listening to someone you love speak to someone you cannot see, don't rush to quiet them. Don't offer correction or diagnosis. Let them have that moment. Sit with them. Be a witness. For what they are experiencing may not be yours to understand, but it is theirs to hold. And when your time comes, as it will for all of us, may you too be welcomed by familiar voices. May the path open with light, and may you remember, even in your last breath, that you are not alone. Thank you for sharing this space with me. I'm Dr. Robert Ellis, and wherever this finds you, whether in grief, in reflection, or in quiet wonder, may you be comforted, may you be at peace, and may you be held always by something greater than words.